Is it? I believe we're restarted now. I think we had a video issue, and so it turned off, and we're back here for you at home. Sorry if you missed some of the talk, but we'll get going on now. We're talking now about the marketing of OxyContin by some of the pharmaceutical companies. They had inspirational videos that they put out in which people talked about how I turned my life around because of these painkillers, and they were sometimes paid actors that were doing it, and sometimes they were not. And some bits of subterfuge and confusion, trying to get people to apparently be supporting OxyContin when really these people weren't even taking OxyContin. They were taking some other painkiller. Pardon me? 1996 would be, yeah, 92 would have been Clinton, right? 92 through 2000 was Clinton. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Clinton, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was, yeah. They're asking what administration was this in 1992 in which Louis Sullivan was saying this, and it was a Clinton administration. 1992 was the election, yeah, so 93, January 93 is when he'd been going in. I don't know if Louis Sullivan was, yeah, under the George H.W. Bush's administration or if he was under Clinton's administration, but 92 it would have been, yeah. Right, yeah. I think you're right. So these inspirational videos were trying to make people comfortable being willing to take it. Hospitals were more and more prescribing it under the threats of potentially being taken to court for not taking care of people's pain while they're in the hospital. And so all those cards when you go into the doctor and they want you to define your pain if you're in the ER or things like that, those were originally by the pain institutes that were subsidized heavily, sometimes completely, by the pharmaceutical companies. So they wanted you to define your pain and help you kind of work your way towards taking the painkillers. As evidence came in that this was not working well, that there were a lot of people actually affected badly, and it was a lot of issues about apparent addiction problems and so on, they fought back in the pharmaceutical companies. They called it, there was a man that came on and was put on board of one of the pharmaceutical companies, and his theory was there's a pseudo-addiction. You've heard of this, Paul, right? Pseudo-addiction. They talked about this in that Dopesick movie. But a pseudo-addiction supposedly is somebody who's evidencing all these signs, the throwing up and the increased breathing, respiration issues and wakefulness issues and so on, and evidencing everything that looks to normal people like addiction. It was called pseudo-addiction. And it was defined as pain-killing behavior that resembles addiction. So people that were, this is what came out from the pharmaceutical companies. Pain-killing behavior that resembles addiction. And actually, you may not believe what the pharmaceutical companies had as the cure for this, the way to solve it. More. Okay? So, I mean, so pseudo-addiction was one of the big things that came out. The other thing that they came out was individualizing the dose, which that was a big phrase that came out. And individualizing the dose gave doctors the free will to basically decide if this person is still complaining about this, give them more, right? So all of these were issues, efforts to try to continue this going on. So it sounds kind of diabolical, and it sounds nasty, and it's a very troublesome, problematic thing. And actually, Purdue Pharma agreed to pay originally back in 2007 $634 million for deceptive marketing. And $634 million is basically a drop in the bucket to the kinds of money that they were bringing in. Another one, Cephalon, paid $444 million, and a third pharmaceutical company, Insys, had some jail time actually and a business closure. But again, nothing comparing with what the profits that were available and being made out there. There were some things that they were taught if you had to get your, when insurance companies are getting more concerned about it, they would ask questions, and people from the pharmaceutical company would offer to call up for the doctors because they knew the right answers to give at the right times. And I heard an interview with a woman who worked for the pharmaceutical company, and all day she was calling up insurance companies to get authorization for higher and higher doses of opioids for patients. And she said that they were taught to say, uh-huh, instead of yes. So if someone would say, if the insurance company said, does the patient have cancer, terminal cancer? And she said that she was taught to say, uh-huh, because you're not saying yes, but you're saying, uh-huh. And they never said yes, but it wasn't yes. So there's a lot of terrible things about it now. Actually, right now, there's something like an $8 billion settlement, I think, that Purdue Pharma is involved in right now. There's been something like $30 billion maybe that they've made on this stuff. So $8 billion sounds like a lot. They don't have to pay the $8 billion. It's paid over a long, protracted format, over 20 years or something like that, and it's only to be paid out of future profits, so it can even, if they don't make future profits, they don't have to pay it. The Sackler family, which owned Purdue Pharma, got out of it. They aren't liable in any sense of the way, even though they were hands-on micromanaging a lot of the things too. But anyways, so a lot of issues about all that. Somewhere, if you saw that chart, there was 70,000 deaths a year is about what it's skyrocketed up to now due to that, which means every 15 minutes a baby is born in America addicted to opiates. And every day 128 Americans die of an overdose. Experts project opioids will kill over 500,000 people in the U.S. over the next decade. And that's 1 in 600 Americans. So it's a significant problem. And then you start saying, what can we do about that? Do we have any issues, any thoughts about what we can do? Prescribe, you say go back to prescribing? Mm-hmm. There's an interesting issue in which, did you have something you were going to say?
I think a lot of the problem too is in certain states there's like not a mandatory record that keeps track of patients like everywhere across the state. So like you could go from one place that's dispensing opioids, get a prescription filled out, and then go to the next one and get another prescription filled out, and then having been oblivious to you already having one.
Right. So he's saying that there's not a common practice of how to keep track of prescriptions and so on. That's actually where I was going to jump into, so you're making an interesting point. There's, I think, 5 states in the U.S., and there's California started it in the 30s, and it's called a triplicate prescription procedure. Illinois has it. New York State has it. Texas has it, and the 5th that I know of is Idaho for some reason. The others are maybe larger states and larger populations, but other states have tried it and dropped it off, and it's very challenging. What basically it says is there's special forms handed out by the state, and maybe you're aware of this too. There's a triplicate form, and a doctor that fills out a prescription for an opioid in this state with a triple prescription policy, he has to keep, or he or she has to keep the prescription, a copy of the prescription in their files for at least 2 years. The pharmacist who fills the prescription has to keep the prescription in their files for at least 2 years. And the third copy goes to the state, who has actual physical paper files. It's not like done on a spreadsheet or something like that, where you have a spreadsheet where you can store as much data as you can on a computer and you don't see it. But there's an actual file in Illinois of doctors that are prescribing opioids, and if they're prescribing a lot of them, their file is physically a lot thicker than other places. There's pharmaceuticals that their file is a lot thicker than other places that aren't prescribing as much. And that gives a potential, if a doctor looks in and sees how thick his file is, he knows there's a file of the exact same thickness somewhere at the state level, right? And so that is a potential for evaluating who's acting. They call it a whale, is somebody who gives out, a doctor that gives out a lot of prescriptions, or a pill mill for pharmacies that give out a lot. And it is a big problem. In some counties in the U.S., there are more prescriptions than people living in that county filled out for opioids in some of these areas. So it's just a gigantic problem. But I guess the feeling is that as a doctor, a person may be less willing to write this, knowing that this file is getting thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker. It's a psychological thing. You know how thick your file is, and you know it's that thick at the state level too. There was some studies done between New York State and Connecticut, and Connecticut has a much bigger problem. Even though they have very similar education levels, very similar, many things similar, similar urban-rural population, similar ethnic levels, similar educational levels, similar income levels, but they found that if you took the rate of overdoses in Connecticut and applied it to a state the size of New York, they'd have had like 25,000 more deaths in New York State in the course of the time that they did this study. So, pardon me? You said more deaths in New York. They would have had more. New York suppressed its rates of deaths compared to what it would be if they had the same rate of addiction and death as they do in Connecticut. So it was a successful thing, it seems like, in that way. If you're giving out a prescription as a doctor for legitimate reasons, you don't mind if that's in a file in your office or somewhere else. But if you know that you're playing a game of selling prescriptions out for whatever reason or the purposes you're doing it for, if you know that you're maybe flouting some of the laws, you're much less likely to write a prescription if you live in one of these states with the triple prescription kind of area. So that's one aspect of it. I don't think anyone feels like opioids should be continually just dropped, unceremoniously dropped. They've provided many benefits to many people. I think that we probably all know somebody who's taken them, or you've maybe taken them at times for certain purposes and gotten benefit out of them too. So, that's not something that you want to disparage, but it's become just a terrible problem. So, yeah, the triple prescription idea was one of the alternatives. Some of the other alternatives or tactics, there's non-opioid therapies, obviously, that could be used, okay? Going back to ibuprofens and Aleve and, the different types of less non-opioid and non-addictive types of painkillers. You could reduce the strengths of opioids, go back to smaller milligram dosages and so on, too. Physical therapy can do a lot of good when people, instead of taking opioids all the time, if they take physical therapy, that helps cure their problem as well. Even mindfulness is talking about getting your head and your mind in a space that you can deal with your pain. And more investments in treatment facilities for people who have addictions. How do you get them off? You know, how do you get them through those addictions? A lot of times the addiction or treatment facilities have a special rule that you can't go into the treatment facility unless you're completely clean of the narcotics that you're taking, right? So it doesn't help people that are still trying to fight their way through. You have to have crossed a few steps of the problem already before they'll even accept you in there. But if they'd have better or different or more supported treatment facilities. But one thing that jumps to mind pretty quickly about that is really where are those kind of mindfulness and treatment facilities and things like that, where are they available? You know, mainly in more income-rich areas, right? In the suburbs and, you know, in small towns and in rural areas, those things aren't available very much. So rural areas don't have capacity to do that very well. It's very, very difficult to find alternatives that work in that area too. So that's some of the different topics I wanted to talk about in terms of opioids. I don't know if we could have a kind of a more of a general discussion and have people come up with thoughts or ideas about what they wanted to say about it. I'll try to hear your question and repeat it so people at home can hear it as well too. So, pain.
We're trying desperately to deal with that human condition called pain, and it looks like no matter what we do, we're caught on the horns of a dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
We can use the milder things like, again, ibuprofen and aspirin and those kind of things. You have no problem. Or we could try the opiate. I keep looking for, is there a third alternative? Spark. I can keep going right to start. Spark, I need that third alternative. What kind of research do you know of or have you heard of that's going in that direction?
Okay. So the question was basically, we're trying to deal with pain, which is an interesting, and how do we deal with the pain? Some of the things I mentioned, is there a third alternative? If you go to lesser things that deal less with pain, then people suffer more from pain. If you deal with the pain and just look at the pain as its own thing, then people, you can overpower it with so much that people become addicted to it. And she's talking about what's the third alternative. You know, and really, there is some level of a frame of mind reference change, I think, that has to happen. You know, we think people nowadays are not as willing to put up with pain as they were, you know, 100 years ago. People on the prairie or something, you imagine, you know, Pa Ingalls or something like that, you know, he'd limp out to work the next day and, you know, go back out, because what do you got to do? You got to feed your family and do things. You know, nowadays people have more alternatives, and once there's more alternatives, people take maybe less responsibility for saying, you know, I can master this, or I can work through it, or whatever. You know, it's hard to tell people to deal with your pain, to live with your pain. No one wants to do it. In fact, there's laws established now, somewhat again established or propagated by the pharmaceutical industry, that doctors and nurses and hospitals can actually be held liable if they don't mitigate your pain properly, you know. And what a tough position to be in there, right? You know, the easiest thing is to get everybody happy, take everybody's pain away, and then they can't bother you about that.
I keep thinking of things like nerve pains in the face and that kind of thing, which are debilitating. And the best way of doing that, of course, is to go in there with an electrode and actually zap the nerve when it gets all excited and cause it to calm down, which is a drastic alternative. I keep thinking there has to be some way of getting into some and trying some other mechanism. Again, the electrical activities of the body have to be more considered than the chemistry is.
Right, Joanne's talking about facial pain and things that are very debilitating, and that maybe shock therapy to that might be, you know, is one way to do it, but that has its own problems as well too. It's in one essence, if you want to look at the pharmaceutical companies, in one area, they were trying to answer the same question that we're talking about now. How do you help people have a better life? How do you help people face the changes and challenges in their life and the pain that they endure? And in one essence, the pharmaceuticals and medicine is one way of helping us, right? But everything has some level of a dark side to it or whatever too, right? There's a problem with it. And if we're looking for a third way, I mean, maybe that's what they exactly were saying back in the 1990s when they were saying, what's a third way of how do we make something that will help with pain, right? It used to be a natural thing. Back 3,000 years ago, the Egyptians were taking poppy, right, and making something that helped people with pain and helped them have pleasure and so on too. So it was a natural thing that now has gotten more and more and more powerful with the power of synthetics and science and engineering to make things more and more effective. These things have just so much more capacity to drive away pain than natural environments. Think of the Native Americans chewing on willow sprigs or something, bark of a willow tree, and that's how they took away pain, because that has aspirin type of things in it too. So, like you said too, the other less addictive things have their problems. They're bad for your liver and so on too. So, I think for a while, it sounded like if you could make opioids non-addictive, you were going to be that third way that you talked about. And as we learn more and as we see more and as we see greed comes in too, and it didn't answer the questions, it didn't solve the problems. They're saying like mindfulness and is a way and so on, but people want faster results than that nowadays too. They want to click a button and change the channel without getting up to the TV. They want to not do mindfulness and so on. John?
Yes, it seems to me we need some way to transition, because you take the opioids for the pain, but eventually that pain is going to be cured or go away. But when you stop taking the opioids, you have a different pain.
Mm-hmm.
So you need some way to transition. How after I solve the first pain, do I transition away from the second one?
In other words, you're saying opioids can be still used as a short term, kind of back to the original way that they were prescribed by doctors, that they could deal with terminal people who weren't going to live long enough to have it become an addiction problem, or to have it work as a short-term solution for a few days and then have a secondary, less addictive solution after that. Mm-hmm. Mark?
The other issue is, to me, is how we make sure that the third alternative is science-based. And
Third alternative is what?
science-based,
Science-based, right?
and so how do you distinguish between the snake oil and the, so like, for example, chiropractors have had a lot of success helping people with pain and different types. But then they start to get, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but it seems like some get a big head and think that they can cure everything
Right.
with chiropractic. And then you have acupuncture, which has shown to be successful. But how do you test these things scientifically to really show how effective they are?
Yeah, how do you test all the different possibilities? Mark talked about acupuncture, and he talked about chiropractic and so on, and that may have some benefits to pain, but how do you test them scientifically and accurately, and again, keep the snake oil salesman out of the business as much as possible? And it's not easy. I know I've had opioids a couple of times for like significant injury and so on when I hurt my elbow badly, and personally I didn't feel much difference to it. I didn't feel, I didn't feel like it was putting me in a different state of mind or anything like that. I still felt the pain, and I've always kind of felt like maybe that's my German heritage or something. You know, you're supposed to kind of fight through all that stuff, you know, tough it out. And so, yeah, it's true. I mean, some people feel the benefits of some slight thing that maybe, you know, the placebo effect comes along. It gets involved in this too, where how do you do an accurate study that really proves how to help people with pain? Because I think pain is such an individual thing for everybody, right? You know, somebody has pain, they say, yeah, but I kind of expected pain. I hurt myself, you know, and other people want it mitigated to a great degree as well too, and aren't happy unless it is. So it's a very challenging study because you're trying to apply a blanket answer to a whole bunch of different individuals. And, you know, we know to actually do it properly, it seems like you should have one person and you should injure that person, right? And then give them this treatment, and then you should injure their other elbow and then give them another treatment and see how that one worked out for it too. And there's some ethics involved in all of this as well too, right?
Yeah, well, that's true. Most drugs, right? They come out with a cure for something, but it's only effective on 40% of the people, the other 60 is not.
Yeah.
So I'm imagining the same thing with painkillers. You know, it works for some, maybe it don't work for others. I don't know.
Yeah, John's saying that who knows what happens, what percentage of people, painkillers may have different effectiveness for different people or different potentials. Yeah, it's a very, and it made it very easy for the pharmaceutical companies to keep on pushing the things that they were pushing. You know, if you think of this, when they talk about like breakthrough pain was a big thing they talked about. And that meant that if you had pain that came back before the 12 hours that they originally said their drug was going to cure you for, then you had breakthrough pain. And that happens in a small number of cases, and you just happen to be a person that's suffering from breakthrough pain. So the answer to that is more drugs, right? Or then, you know, all the different aspects of it. Again, it's so hard to tell, is a breakthrough pain the same for everybody? And even a doctor, how does a doctor know exactly what pain their patient is feeling? You know, you can see the bruise on their back or you see the different problems, but how do you really quantify, right, the amount of pain? And what's a 7 for one person is a 3 for somebody else, right? You know, so it's a very tough thing to get any kind of data on, and it also allows for a lot of exploitation and problem solving with it too. So, Paul.
Well, for certain conditions, there can be different types of treatment like anesthesia or nerve blocks. I had my broken thumb once. It required a screw to put in. They put me out and they gave me a shot that numbed my arm. And there was no addictive aspect to it. It was really quite annoying because my arm was flopping around. Put it on the arm and fell down.
Yeah.
But there are options, but they're more for special cases.
Paul's talking about special cases and options that can also be done. When he injured his thumb, they gave him a shot that numbed his whole arm, which was annoying. You weren't signing any contracts for a while or anything, right? Answering the phone and eating corn on the cob. You weren't doing that day. Yeah. And yeah, so there's certain answers. He said that you know, certain anesthesia that can numb your whole arm for a thumb injury and so on too. And again, yeah, I mean, that stuff maybe is more documented. You know, if you give that to you or anyone else, that arm is going to be limp for a while, right? It's not going to be doing things. But this is also trying to get people that could potentially still go back to work or whatever as well too. I do think that, you know, this triple prescription idea is a pretty interesting aspect to it. It psychologically encourages the doctors to be more ethical in what they're doing, you know, and you know that you have something there, some data there that you can as a prosecutor or someone looking into this as a lawyer, you can go and say, you know, an investigator even, you can say, this doctor bears some looking into, or, what's going on with this person and why. So I think that has some benefits that ought to be looked into more, and maybe it's helped Illinois and some of these other states not have the terrible problems that have happened in other places. Joanne?
Watchdog at the end of that?
Pardon me?
Is there a state watchdog that's actually monitoring that and saying, wait a minute, this doctor is out of line?
Supposedly, I mean, that's the purpose. The third prescription goes to the state, and no one knows. It's sort of like the IRS, maybe, or something like that, right? Here's my tax return, and you're at least documenting something that you have to have the potential, the capacity to stand up to later, right? And I would think that, yeah, you can't just have this triple prescription that means nothing. If it has to have some level of investigative capacity behind it, and you would think that though somehow they'd keep a record, and the top 8% or whatever of prescription writers would get a visit from somebody or a phone call or something like that, right? Or have to document what they're doing. And right. Well, whenever you hire an IRS investigator, you're really hiring an armed thug nowadays, but so.
Is there any data on doctors who are prescribing stuff knowing that the patient doesn't have pain? I mean, I've read things that the worst place in the country is like Kentucky, eastern Kentucky, where like 4 times, and how to make up a number.
Right.
Give these prescriptions. Obviously, they're not necessarily in pain, but their addicts probably come in so they go away to get a fix.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like many other things, there's some aspect of denied plausibility that people want to have. A doctor wants to be able to say, I try to help people with pain, and maybe I'm more aggressive than other people, or maybe I'm not, but I think that they tend to think of themselves. I don't think in almost any field people don't think of themselves as monsters that are doing terrible things to the world. They think that they're helping and doing things in a way. They develop these doctors that develop these concepts of pseudo addiction. Imagine, is that guy sleeping at night? That came up with that. That just is such a amazing concept. Blaming that's basically what the pharmaceuticals and many of the doctors did. They blamed their patients for misleading them, for confusing them, for taking advantage of them, or for or defining it in a different way. Pain-killing behavior that resembles addiction. That's you're throwing up to try to look like you're killing your pain somehow. It's just it's amazing.
Get back to the problem is there's no way for a doctor or anyone, as far as I know, to measure pain other than what the patient tells them. And if the patient isn't being honest about his pain, you get a friendly doctor says, I'm in the 9th or 10th smiley face here, I need it.
Right. Yeah, John's saying that there's no reasonable way that any doctor or any researcher can really measure pain, right? Measure the pain that their patient is feeling and quantify it. I mean, that's very true, and you'd think that even if you want to study it, you're hard-pressed to make an ethical study about pain, right? I mean, you want to study pain in people, and you want to have a valuable thing that gives you some information. You're causing some pain or doing something that, or else you're sort of fighting it with some other topic that maybe isn't as accurate or isn't as, as valid as an answer. So it's a very challenging thing to come up with a way to mitigate pain in people. And the shysters and the snake oil salesmen and different people are always going to be there, it seems like to me. And it seems like there needs to be some level of restriction, what am I thinking of? Oversight, right. Oversight, some kind of methodology that tries to minimize that as much as possible. People are going to do things to their lives because they think it's what they need right then, and it's not always the best thing to do, but you can't fix everybody in that regard. it's a very challenging topic, you know, to try to understand how to do it, and you hope that people have freedom to make choices about what they should do with their life and how they should take care of their pain. But this stuff takes over your life. You're not helping your life if you're getting that much involved with opioids and so on. You know, and that video showed, you know, some aspects of how much dopamine that can actually, you know, affect into your body, and, you know, it's changing your whole point of view, and you want to keep feeling good. You don't want to feel bad. A lot of people felt for quite a while that this stuff was really, really helping them from injuries, and then they weren't. Then all of a sudden they were addicted. So, well, I think we've run out of time. I thank you for the questions and the input. It means a lot to have such happy, smiling faces here. I believe you're smiling. You all have masks on, but there. Scott's talking in 2 weeks, and Dave, do you remember what Scott's talking about in 2 weeks? Yeah, he had. I know he had it, and I wrote it down, and I don't have it with me right now. He was telling me yesterday, and I can't remember. So that's 2 weeks from now. I think you're doing one in 4 weeks from now, Scott. I mean, Dave. And what's that about? Oh yeah, the Halloween one. Yeah, we used to do things at Easter about resurrection science and so on. I talked about toads and stuff that came back from the dead. And so you're doing one about Halloween, the two of you. I'm actually going to be in Venice on a bicycling trip. So you don't bicycle much in Venice, I hear. We get a few days in Venice, and then we get off the island, and then we go up the Po River, if it has water in it, and go riding on the canal, riding alongside and out to little places and get to a canal boat each day. So it should be fun. So thanks so much for coming in. It was so great to see you all, and have a nice day. All right.